Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pavlo Burdiak. I am a PhD student at the University of Szeged in Hungary and a visiting researcher at the Lodz Cyber Hub in Poland, thanks to the support of the Visegrad Scholarship Program. As part of my ongoing research at the Lodz Cyber Hub, I'm looking into international dimensions of regulating disinformation on online platforms, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the preliminary findings on the UN initiatives in this area that I managed to conceptualize so far. The main message of the presentation is the following. When we counter disinformation, we should follow international human rights standards, especially the principles of legality, legitimacy, necessity, and proportionality. And now let's discuss this topic in more details. The spread of harmful disinformation can inflict significant harm on our societies, eroding a wide spectrum of human rights. For instance, disinformation about health interventions like vaccines can lead to severe physical harm and even loss of life. Disinformation pertaining to elections can undermine the right to free and fair elections and to participate in public affairs. Additionally, disinformation often involves hate speech that fuels discrimination, hostility, and violence. When disinformation endangers human rights, it becomes essential to take necessary steps to address these detrimental consequences. Many states try to address disinformation through various legal means. Some enact specific legislation targeting disinformation, while others integrate disinformation-related provisions into existing legal frameworks. However, many of these legal instruments are drafted with broad and ambiguous language, which has the potential risk of restricting not just disinformation, but also legitimate expressions. The UN Human Rights Council emphasized that countering disinformation should not be used as a pretext for curtailing human rights or justifying censorship. Instead, all policies and legislation aimed at addressing disinformation must be grounded in international human rights law, which begs the question, what is this international human rights law framework? Let's start with the notion of disinformation as such. Within the UN, disinformation is usually defined as false information that is disseminated intentionally to cause serious social harm. Based on this definition, we can outline three elements that typically comprise disinformation: inaccuracy, sharing factually incorrect information; intent to deceive, the intention to mislead individuals or public; and serious harm, which refers to serious consequences of disinformation, such as inciting violence, undermining public health, and so on. Now let's take a look at the provisions of international human rights law for combating disinformation. While international human rights law encompasses a wide range of human rights, it is crucial to focus on international standards specifically related to freedom of expression. Why? Because freedom of expression standards provide a guidance on how to strike a balance between the need to counter the intentional spread of harmful false information on the one side, with the fundamental right to express one's opinions and ideas, regardless of how controversial they may be, on the other side. This balancing exercise is crucial for crafting effective strategies that uphold human rights while tackling disinformation. So let's look at the freedom of expression standards developed within the UN. The right to freedom of expression is guaranteed by Articles 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It consists of two interrelated aspects: an internal aspect associated with freedom of opinion, and an external aspect linked to freedom of expression as such. Let's start with the freedom of opinion. Individuals have a right to hold opinions without interference. It's done to ensure that we have the autonomy to form, maintain, or change our opinions without external pressure, influence, restrictions, or coercion. However, in practice, various external factors constantly influence individuals' thinking and opinions. One of the examples of how disinformation can potentially impact the freedom of opinion can be found in the digital domain, where state and non state actors may influence people's opinions, often without their explicit knowledge or consent, by utilizing tools like content curation, content recommendations, or micro targeting, which may sometimes promote disinformation. Recognizing and addressing these dynamics is vital in upholding the integrity of freedom of opinion in the digital age. Except for freedom of opinion, we also have the right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds through any media, including online platforms. Unlike the freedom of opinion, the right to freedom of expression is not absolute and can be subject to certain restrictions. Any restrictions of freedom of expression, including those targeting disinformation, must be consistent with the principles of legality, legitimacy, necessity, and proportionality. Legality, legitimacy, necessity, and proportionality. Legality. Restrictions should be provided by law. This means that policies on countering disinformation should be clearly and narrowly defined in the relevant legal instruments. Laws and policies that are vague and grant excessive discretion can result in arbitrary decisions that are incompatible with international standards. Legitimacy. Restrictions should pursue a legitimate goal. The mere prohibition of disinformation in and of itself is not considered a legitimate goal. Rather, any limitations imposed on disinformation must have a direct connection to at least one of the legitimate goals under Article 19 of the ICCPR, such as respect of the rights and reputations of others, protection of national security, public order, health, morals, etc. Necessity and proportionality. To decide on the necessity of imposing restrictions on disinformation, it's crucial to consider the relationship between the disinformation and the harm it may cause, as well as how severe and immediate that harm could be. Additionally, the principle of necessity requires that we use the proportional and the least intrusive means to protect the stated legitimate goal. For example, in all but most extreme cases, criminal penalties for spreading disinformation are considered disproportionate responses to restricting false, harmful expressions. Now, it's important to note that these standards are legally binding for states as the primary actors responsible to address disinformation. As for private corporate actors, the UN's soft law creates rather non-binding recommendations to follow these standards in their policies and practices. In conclusion, the UN's legal framework stipulates that any measures taken to counter disinformation must follow the principles of legality, legitimacy, necessity, and proportionality. Therefore, balancing the genuine need to counter disinformation with the human rights safeguards for freedom of expression is essential to maintaining a just and rights respect in response to disinformation. If you are interested in this topic or would like to share your feedback and thoughts, please drop me an email and we'll take it from there. Thank you for your attention.